I'm joined now by the Senator from Hawaii, Brian Schatz. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Thanks for having me.
So we have been kind of put in a situation where Trump is engaged in his shock and awe campaign. The latest affront that he caused was basically trying to shut down USAID. There's been a lot of consternation among Democrats out here more broadly, or in this country more broadly, in that it feels like there's nothing that we can do to prevent all of this stuff from happening. You've taken a different approach, and you have actually done something. Can you explain what you've done?
Well, I've placed a hold on all State Department nominees, and I don't want to exaggerate our power here. We lost the Senate 53 to 47, so eventually they will get all of their nominees. But this will, gum up the works and make it a little more difficult for them. I think we need to use whatever leverage we have, which over the next several weeks is pretty minimal, because when it comes to nominations, they have their majority, and I think we've seen with RFK Jr., with Tulsi Gabbard, with Kash Patel, but they're not going to block any of these nominees. They're just not. They're going to get their cabinet. After that, Democrats in the United States Senate are needed in order to enact a spending bill, in order to do any number of things. So it's one of those things where in the first month of any presidency, the legislative branch is way less relevant. Then there's a kind of recalibration of they're going to have to start to talk to us. And I think we intend to use our leverage. Now, I'm not here to preview exactly how we're going to use our leverage, but I think one of a couple of things have happened. There's been a disconnect, I think, with voters out there, people out there who want to see us fighting, sort of between are you fighting hard enough, and then sort of randomly tweeting out things that really would be ineffectual, right? And would have all the impact of like a sternly worded memo.
Right.
I mean, I've actually told my staff there are going to be exceptions, but like no more letters to Trump saying you shouldn't have done that, right?
It's the sir, excuse me, sir letters.
How dare he?
Yeah.
Look, he's doing it. But the other part of this is that I actually think the grassroots is waking up too. Like I've talked to a number of grassroots organizers, and the truth is, like on Inauguration Day, in Trump won, there was a mass movement against him. And that mass movement, in my view, still exists, but it was dormant, right? And so I remember being home in Honolulu, and one of the, and people sticking their head out the window, saying, go get him, that kind of thing. And for I would say the weeks after the election, that was not the vibe, right?
Yeah.
And once these executive actions started, the grassroots sort of started to sort of awake. And now they're appropriately putting pressure on their Democratic leaders to try to do more. And I'm going to try to do more. But I also think that, given the fact that we kind of went through this in one term, we have to be as honest and direct as possible about where we actually have leverage and where it's just like, I was talking to the folks from one of the big organizing progressive groups, and I said, look, I just don't want to consider success being like, oh, today I didn't get yelled at online, right? Because I could go through this whole period of time like thinking that constitutes a good day's work. But the point here is to win, right? And the strategy, at least as it relates to these illegal executive orders, is to not stipulate to the idea that we just elected a monarch, to not stipulate to the idea that the president gets to shut down any agency, USAID or the Department of Education or the Bureau of Indian Education or the National Science Foundation. Like we can talk about all the impacts, and we should. And we should say it's outrageous, but we should not stipulate that this is the end of it. A lot of what they tried to do is going to be overturned in the courts. Now, lots of people are going to be hurt in the meantime, and we ought to fight it, and we ought to recognize how much harm is being caused. But I really don't want anybody to think that this guy gets to wave away federal law with the stroke of a pen. He's finding things inconvenient. He's writing an EO to try to get rid of things he finds to be a nuisance. I mean, the best example for that was in the wake of the terrible plane crash in the Potomac. They signed an EO saying this is Joe Biden's fault. Like, it was the weirdest EO. So some of these have real force of law. And for instance, in the area of tariffs, the president has very broad authority. But the idea that you can just like do a broad payout of government employees that goes beyond the expiration of the appropriations bill, or that he can announce that he's going to like purchase Gaza. None of those things are within his authority. They're scary, they're stupid, but we also have to kind of sort out what's actually happening versus what he wants us to believe is happening. And that is different from not being alarmed. Everybody should be sufficiently alarmed and mobilized, but we also have to, our high ground is that we are still a country of laws, and he is still constrained by what the federal law says, what the Constitution says, and he's still constrained by what's unpopular. Like last week, the federal funding freeze, it both lost in court, but it also lost in the court of public opinion, and they quickly backed off and said, we never meant to cut down the Medicaid portal, we never meant to shut down Head Start, and that was because there was an immediate nationwide backlash against their actual actions. And so, obviously the last 2 weeks have not been good, but there have been glimmers of hope where there are the seeds of a strong democratic system. And part of that depends on us continuing to believe in it and not believe that all is lost.
I want to dig into the prospect of, okay, there's going to come a point where the legislative branch will become front and center. But my worry, and I think I'm speaking for a lot of folks who are watching this unfold, is that in fact the legislative branch, or at least the Republicans who have the majority, are completely content not to jealously guard their control over appropriations, over the purse, over their own whatever their prerogatives are, and instead are allowing Donald Trump to do what he's doing. So to what extent are his actions right now kind of being given the green light by these Republicans who would otherwise have control over the purse?
Well, let me be more precise then. Yes, let's not count on Republicans. I think we should put pressure on Republicans. I think there is an outside chance that
let me rephrase, because I want to be clear. Like, to what extent is he able, if the bulwark to Trump's worst excesses here, these executive orders, whatever it is, if the bulwark is, for example, the Congress coming forward and saying, look, you can't do this. This is our prerogative. We're the ones who get to determine whether aid is congressionally allocated funding is actually allocated, but they don't do it. And there's really nobody to stand up to him. And the DOJ is in his pocket, and Mike Johnson's in his pocket, and John Thune's in his pocket, and the Supreme Court is in his pocket. Then really, what is the bulwark to him being able to say, it is what it is. I'm moving forward with this stuff, and the people who would be in place to stop me aren't willing to do that, and so on I go.
I'm not going to preview the precise strategy here, but what I'm trying to say is not that the legislature generically is going to push back, but that the way the votes line up, on some things it's just a close enough call where they may actually need Democratic votes because they have some people who are going to go south on them. But in some instances, they just need 60 votes, which means they need Democratic participation. And that's where we have an extraordinary amount of leverage, considering that we're the minority party. And so, I'm not here to announce exactly how we will use that leverage, but this is not just a wing and a prayer that like these guys just wake up and say, you know what, we got to be separate and co-equal, and we're going to assert ourselves. They won't do that. But there is a point at which, assuming the filibuster stands, they're going to have to talk to Democrats. And, our price is not going to be like, please do this small thing on like Medicare and dental health. Yeah. By the way, I don't want to say that's a small thing. I'm sure that's very important.
No, but I understand your point.
Like this is they're going to need us, and they don't need us right now until they get through their cabinet. And then they're immediately going to say, hey, can we have a conversation? And that's one of the things I've conveyed is that, you're putting us in a very difficult position to display any degree of inclination towards bipartisanship. And I have told, let me just give you a good example. And I understand foreign aid is not the, motivating factor for even Democratic voters. But I'll just give you an example because it's my area of jurisdiction. I told them, look, I'll talk to you about reforming foreign aid. I actually think that there's a legitimate point of view that we should focus on our core responsibilities of preventing disease, right? And preventing suffering, and creating economic stability and having good political and military alliances. Like that's a fine thing. And I was in the middle of that conversation, I'm not kidding, with my Republican counterparts when they just decided to shutter the whole agency. And so a couple of Republicans have come to me and said, hey, can we talk about reforming USAID? I said, sure, if you open it, right?
Yeah.
Because so look, I am trying to find a way so that the center can hold, but right now it's not holding. Right now, these guys are moving with impunity, but that doesn't mean they're going to be able to make the stuff they're doing stick. If the purpose is arson, that's a little harder to reverse. But if the purpose is to have any of these things sort of withstand legal scrutiny, they just won't. Like, I understand the courts are tilted towards Donald Trump, but that's when it's a close call, right? When there's a duly enacted statute, president can't just ignore the statute. And even this Supreme Court is not going to uphold the ignoring of a duly enacted statute. So I just don't want to look, this is bad enough. We don't need to put extra spin on the ball and catastrophize it.
Yeah.
We need to know exactly what we're dealing with. And it is a deadly serious thing. But one of the most deadly serious, I think, disadvantages we have right now is this sense that there are no checks here. Of course there are checks. Anybody who is in office by virtue of being elected doesn't want to do unpopular things. And so one of the things that I thought was most important over the last week, and we've been talking about it a lot, is that people are now showing up in real life in 3 dimensions, right? Like at the Treasury building, at local meetings and town halls. Like, people have to see it, right? Back in Hawaii on the campaign side, people do yard signs, and they also stand on the corner and just wave with the sign of the candidate they like. And the reason that matters, because obviously you're not in the persuasion business if you're just standing next to a name, but it's a 3-dimensional representation of, hey, my neighbor thinks this and is willing to put themselves physically out there on the street corner for this candidate. And that counts for something. And so part of what I think is very important over the next couple of weeks is to show a mass movement again. And it won't be pink hats. And we've learned a few lessons here, and we're certainly not going to call it the resistance, but there is a mass movement that is growing in a nonlinear fashion over the last week or so. And to me, that's my most hopeful sign. And I think what we need to have, maybe unlike 2 terms ago, is a kind of more constructive, more direct conversation about what powers do we have and what powers do we not. I'll just give you one example. There's a bunch of people who are like, put the Senate into a quorum call. And I'm like, that's 10 minutes, man. That doesn't do, you know what I mean? Literally 10 minutes. And I guess if what you're trying to effectuate is to be able to say, I didn't agree to anything. And it's like, I think I've got a better plan than just making people vote one extra time.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, I can't delineate exactly what we're going to do, both procedurally and strategically, on Twitter or Blue Sky or Instagram. But there has to be a little bit of it can't just be a couple of people defining what it means to resist. I also feel that there's a little bit of, it when you see it, right? Yeah. When I saw Jasmine Crockett in front of Treasury, I thought, well, that's it, right? Is it a procedural move? No. I think when people saw me deciding to block all State Department nominees, they said, that's it. So it is one of those things where, what is it Steve Jobs used to say? People don't know what they want until you show it to them.
Right. And
I think we just have to show them, because understandably, if we're not doing anything, then people go I don't know, put it into a quorum call, fuck around with them.
Yeah.
I think we have to do things that will work. And that is a strategy of litigation. It's public opinion. It's oversight. We do still have some procedural roadblocks we can put up. We can, at a later date, use the need for our votes for leverage. We're not without power here. We are out of power, but we're not powerless. And I think that's the message that people need to kind of internalize.
Yeah, and I think, by the way, to your point, I think the message that Trump is trying to convey, or the sentiment he's trying to convey is with this whole shock and awe campaign, that there is no power on the left. And so the point is to kind of leave everybody feeling completely disillusioned and disenchanted and kind of in a position where we just throw our hands up and say, look, there is no bulwark. The courts aren't going to do anything. Mike Johnson and John Thune are not going to do anything, and so he's just going to get away with everything. So we have to just take a step back. I think that is his strategy, and the Republicans are feeding into that strategy, which is why a lot of folks on this side are left feeling that way, because that's the deliberate strategy being put forward by the Republicans, which, by the way, is why it was so heartening to see, for example, that you were willing to stand up and install all of Trump's nominees, because I think just the sense of knowing that, okay, we've got fight in us, and that there are procedural maneuvers we can take, in pushing back, is at least going to be important as more and more people start to key into this process, recognize what he's doing, and kind of wake up from the dormancy that we've been in for the last few weeks at least.
Yeah, and I think, my advice for anybody watching or listening is, like, pick one winnable fight. And it could be at the school board, it could be for the legislature, it could be a public policy thing. It could just be you've got a friend who leaned Trump or voted for Trump or didn't like Kamala or was frustrated with Biden or whatever, and just start to soften them up, right? Like I just did that with an old friend from college, and he said, I don't vote blue anymore, but I like what you're doing. And I said, maybe you were just frustrated with Democrats, and I listed some of the reasons, and I got it right.
Yeah.
But, like, you're welcome back. And he said, yeah. That's it. Just, yeah. This is a friend from college.
Yeah.
And that's listen, you've got millions of people who listen to you. So it's not actually unimaginable that the main thing people can do out there in the world is not effectuate, like, whether RFK Jr. becomes the HHS secretary. That is a matter of how many Republican votes they've got, and I think they've got them. Yeah. But if 10 or 20,000 of your listeners change one mind each, we're now talking about, getting close to the margin of victory in some of those swing states. So, look, everybody's got a role here. I think it is fair to say that Republicans have created a bit of a fog here intentionally, and we have to, forest and trees here. But even I have to triage, right? And say, I can't literally say 10 times a day, I can't believe he did that. It's so unlawful. And so I am focusing on the very, precise question of Russ Vought, right? Who is going to run the Office of Management and Budget, which normally people should not care about, except that this guy is the architect of Project 2025. And in Project 2025, in addition to all the crazy ideas, there's a very specific, like, passage about how the OMB director should essentially be the king's hand.
Yeah.
It should represent the president in all things, that it is a physical manifestation of unitary presidential authority. It's a very weird idea. And by the way, not a little bit self-serving. If it's like, hey, what if this position were all powerful? And then what if I had it? And so we're going to the floor, and we're going to actually have, I think, more than 40 senators, and we are going to maintain presence on the floor, take the full 30 hours, and talk the whole time about the damage that Russ Vought is going to do to the American experiment.
All right. Well, Senator, I appreciate all the steps that you're taking and giving us a glimmer of optimism out here. Thank you again for taking the time today.
Thank you.